Cool. Well, thanks very much for doing this, Neil. We're trying to sort of manage the technical ad hoc way of getting around recording and doing a lecture at the same time. And just so everyone knows, we're going to put this out on a bonus episode of the Cinematologist podcast and maybe on YouTube as well. There will be time for Q&A at the end. You might have to come up here and ask Neil directly. That would be nice. But again, if you want to ask a question, you are going to be on the recording. So Neil, yeah, I mean, I asked you to do this primarily because of the work that you did on wilderness. And just to give you a little bit of context, we're in this middle of this module that's about professional development and students working out how they can forge a career, starting within the context of university in the second year. So they're quite away from graduating still, but it's that sense of not getting to the end of the course and being like, okay, shit, what now? You know what I mean? So we'll talk a little bit about the film, but also about your sort of general experience about working with students in that professional environment. But maybe you could just give us a quick intro and a biog, just so everybody knows who you are.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today virtually. It's really nice to be talking to you. My name's Neil Fox, Professor of Film Practice and Pedagogy at Falmouth University, where I work with professional filmmakers on film productions and sort of working out how to work with students and graduates in those sort of professional environments, and then I do research out of that. But it's a long way from where I started. So I started as an independent filmmaker. I studied film at university in the late 90s, then set up a company in Luton, which is where I'm from, making films and running film festivals. And the films that I was making were kind of always, because they were being made in Luton, kind of low budget, independent, and often crewed by people who hadn't had any experience of working on film sets, including students from the local university. So by the time I got to university, sort of teaching in 2013, I was kind of well versed in making indie movies with just a load of people who had no experience. So when I was asked what I wanted to do based on my doctorate, which was in film education, which I think we might talk about, when I was sort of asked by my new boss what we should be doing, I said we should be making feature films and we should be making short films, within the department that utilize students on them in key roles rather than just the old placement model, which had been around for quite a while. I'm a screenwriter and producer by background. I'm also a podcaster, as you might know. I write film criticism as well, particularly around music documentaries. And I've got a book coming out about music documentaries and concert films in the spring with the BFI. So I think that's probably a good potted history.
Cool, thanks for that. So as you said there, your PhD is in film education, and obviously trying to get a feature made, and we'll come on to Wilderness itself, is a very difficult thing anyway. But then to get it done within the institutional barriers that that universities are is a massive undertaking. So just to start off with, what do you think are some of the difficulties for teaching film practice in universities with the supposed aim of preparing students for industry?
I think the most difficult thing is trying to help students kind of shift their mindset when they arrive into what's actually possible teaching at universities. I think that understandably, the majority of students who arrive doing a film degree have a thought that working in film means working at Pinewood on the latest Bond or the latest Star Wars or the latest, huge Christopher Nolan project, which is a kind of rarefied air. And it's kind of probably less than 1% of what filmmaking, in terms of how it's actually done professionally around the world, actually takes place. But that is a very kind of, romantic and kind of very powerful notion that you're going to work on huge sets with huge amounts of staff and huge budgets. And there's going to be a huge amount of crew and it's going to take a long time. Whereas the reality of what universities can actually provide an education in is independent film. We might have some of the same cameras that get used, but the amount of resource is much, much less than you'll find on a kind of big budget film. Timing is different. Levels of experience are different. We don't have access to all the same departments. So what we're really teaching at universities is how to be an independent filmmaker. Now, largely, that is what most of the filmmakers that the students who would come to university, aspire to be. That's how they started. They started in that kind of environment of scrabbling around, trying to make work, trying to do the best they can, trying to solve problems, trying to be creative, trying to just get something made against kind of great odds very, very quickly. So I think we are teaching the skills that students will need at all levels of the industry, but what it looks like when you're at university in terms of the kind of filmmaking you're doing is always going to be much closer to independent film, because universities just don't have the resource to match what sort of elite filmmaking actually looks like. And I think that one of the problems that universities have got themselves into over the last 20 years is sort of marketing themselves as being able to do that, because it's never going to be possible, and it leaves courses with a very difficult task. One of the great things about it, which is also the challenge, is helping students kind of develop those skills and understand that the scale of filmmaking might go up if you progress through the industry to that very, very, very top, but ultimately your day to day in terms of what you're being asked to do is very, very similar. The fundamentals are kind of the same.
Cool. So beyond then turning up to class and passing assessments, which again always has that air of being very schooly, you know what I mean? And it's really difficult then, because you want the filmmaking process and to be enjoyable and to be cool and fun and all those kinds of things. But whenever you put learning outcomes and all that kind of stuff on the top of it, it becomes kind of problematic. And we're always sort of trying to manage that sort of transition, as you say, and then on a module like this, saying to students, look, it's up to you to kind of take responsibility for your own trajectory into the industry. And often that involves doing things that's beyond just what's in class. So what should students be doing from early on while they're in the context of university and going through their journey with regards to career shaping and that kind of thing?
Turning up's a good start, always. Again, it's a good discipline. I think you're going to be expected to turn up when you're in the professional world. So kind of getting that discipline of turning up, even when you're tired, or even when you don't want to do it, or you think it's a bit boring or whatever. Like, it's a really good discipline for work that is going to be kind of necessary. I think a lot of people come to university knowing what they want to do, and that's really great. In terms of like what path they want to do. They want to be an editor, they want to be a sound designer, they want to be a cinematographer, and that's great. A lot of people don't. I don't think there's a better approach to being, in terms of, but I think that in both instances, one of the most important things is understanding that the university itself is not going to get you a job. It's always going to be on you to work out what you're going to do when you leave. Now, universities can support that. They can give you the skills. They can provide introductions. They can provide opportunities. But it is always going to be down to you to develop the skills that help you when you leave. So I think that if you know what you want to do, then it is kind of on you to make the most of that experience, make the most of the opportunities. And the sooner you start doing that, the better. Like, I think it is common for people to think, well, I'll do that just before I leave. But I always think it's important to think of it in terms of like having the momentum to leave kind of with velocity, rather than doing your degree and then almost having a standing start when you leave and thinking, okay, well, what next? Because in this context of university, those opportunities are places to learn, places to kind of to work out how things work, what the culture's like, what is expected of you, and being able to come back and talk to your staff or even your peers about your experiences and help them shape you in a kind of environment where there's less at stake than just being out there on your own and kind of at the mercy of the industry. The other thing I think is just take the time to work out, if you don't know what you want to do, what you want to do. I think universities are underappreciated as spaces for development of people's, identity and what they actually want to do. There is a pressure that kind of society puts on sort of young people, and that universities kind of exert as well in a lot of the ways they promote their courses, as if like you must know when you arrive. But one of the great things about university is a space to be curious and a space to try things and experiment. And I always think if you're leaving university knowing actually I'd like to spend more time working in production design, that's what I'm going to do next. That's a really good degree as far as I'm concerned, because you've been exposed to a lot of different opportunities. You've been curious, you've done this, you've done that. You've not had a really steadfast idea of who you are, which I think when you're 18 is quite dangerous. And then you've taken that opportunity and committed to it, and now you're in a better place for understanding what you're going to do when you leave. I think that I teach screenwriting, and one of the hardest things I teach in screenwriting is kind of confidence in yourself. I think that I can vaguely remember being 18, and I remember this kind of patina of confidence, which masked not really having much confidence, and a lot of the challenges of university are basically talking to people about your work, about what you want to do, and kind of getting comfortable having conversations with people. And I think we might talk more about that later on in terms of like what filmmaking is in terms of being really valuable, and what's meaningful and what life lessons sort of come out of it. But ultimately, you've just got to have conversations with people. You've just got to talk to people. You just got to get to know people. You've got to learn, the kinds of people you want to spend time with. And most of those people that you're going to meet in the industry in terms of job roles are sitting around you, and you should be kind of developing a kind of core community of filmmakers that will be there when you leave. And that kind of, I've always benefited from collaboration in the sense of not just creatively, but it's very difficult working in film. So if you've got a team of people around you who you've known for a long time, who you're very comfortable with, who you can go into each project with, it's really, really valuable.
Great. So just moving on to Wilderness then. So this is one of the most impressive things I think that you've done, is to write and produce a feature, like I say, on its own, but then to have it crewed, I don't know, you can tell me, it's 90% by students, but also then produced kind of as a commercial film, so it doesn't have that badging of being a student film. So maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about the development of that, how did you get it through the university as a starting point?
By kind of just using indie smarts, really. You sort of mentioned earlier about like, making films within this kind of institutional space. And I think that my experience of making work in Luton, sort of developing film festivals, and I'd always been, kind of aware of what I needed to do in order to get a project made, and who I had to kind of convince to give me the money or the time to do it in a way that framed the project for their ends, be that kind of funders or, local councils or local, whoever it was I was trying to work with. I knew that there would be a way of kind of communicating what it was that would make it easier for them to trust me, and kind of give them a sense that it was worth investing in. Now, that I never did that from a disingenuous place, like it wasn't like, oh, I just want money to go off and do my own thing. I was always interested in, education particularly, and, working in a community. But I also wanted to make films, and it's hard to make films, and it's hard to make the kind of films where you're just making the film you want to make, and trying to stay true to that when it's not always the most commercially viable opportunity, sort of project. So as I sort of said earlier, when I moved into university teaching, I still wanted to make films, and I hadn't made a feature at that point. So in the back of my mind was, how can I make a feature? So I just used the experience I'd had. And because I'd worked with a lot of students and recent graduates who had no experience but were absolutely brilliant on set, I kind of did go into both my doctorate and teaching in university with the mindset of like, students can be trusted to make work at a much higher level than they are. There is a very kind of common perception of students that, that they're just students and they don't know anything. And I think that's really kind of, pernicious throughout the industry. And I was always a bit stubborn in that sense. I was like, well, I wonder if we could do this. So I kind of pitched it as thinking that it could work, and knowing that even if we didn't make it, like if we didn't succeed in making a feature in the time that we had with the budget we had, it would still be a great experience for students, and I would still learn whether it was possible or not to do it this way. It was kind of the only option I had in terms of making a feature at the time. So I kind of framed it entirely as a teaching exercise, knowing that it would be, and knowing that that's where the real value was always going to be. And then if we made it, that would be great. If it was good, even better. And then if it went further and further, all of that was a bonus, really. So I was confident that we could make something. But in that weird way, I did that kind of classic indie film thing of being like, oh yeah, we can do this, and we could do it, and we can do it in 2 weeks at Easter, and we can do it for this amount of money. And then, of course, the university said, okay. And I was like, okay, yeah. And they were like, yeah, that sounds great. We'll back this. And then, so I said to the director, who I've worked with for a long time, who'd worked in this way with me, I said, okay, they've said yes, we can make it then, and they're going to give us some money. But we didn't have a script. We didn't have a project at that point, because I think in the back of my mind, I was always like, they're never going to go for this. But they did. So then that was sort of September 2015, and we'd agreed that we were going to shoot in April 2016 in 2 weeks over spring break. So then I literally had to develop a project from scratch, write it, and then get into pre-production. So I kind of wrote the script between September and December, and then from January we were in pre-production. And the students kind of we launched it to the students in the September and said we're going to make this in April, and that started that. And then we just sort of put the creative team together, which was very, very small. As you said, there was only the editor was a professional, the director was a professional, the DP that we planned was a professional, and we had a professional sound recordist who was on staff, and myself. But other than that, everything was going to be student based, apart from the actors who were obviously hired professionals. And then we ended up shooting in April, and we got it done we shot over 11 days in Cornwall, and we did 1 day of pickups in Luton at a jazz club. But that was it. Yeah, it was done.
So when you did pitch it to the students, then obviously you're not going to be able to, because your course is a big course like this one, not everybody's going to get on. So how did you sort of deal with that kind of situation? Were there interviews that the students had to go through? And was it from the start, was what they did on set then part of their assessment? Is that how you sort of structured it for the students?
Yeah, weird that my fear was that loads of students wouldn't get on. What ended up happening was that hardly anybody applied. So everybody who did apply got on. And
why was that then? What, I mean, do you have any sort of reasoning for that?
If I'm being kind, it's because it hadn't been done before, But we've been doing that version of things now for almost 10 years, and still very, very few students apply to be on these kinds of productions. And I find that really interesting. And I think that it does go back to what I was saying before, in terms of there's a confidence thing. There's a sense of like, oh, I won't get on. It's not for me. I don't have enough experience. Whereas the reality is that's fine. No one does. We're asking everybody who's kind of at the same level, and it's not about having experience. It's about committing to something and then getting the experience through it. But we kind of built the process so that it was assuming that more people would, and we still do it the same way, which is that students apply through the production. So although I was a producer on it, I had nothing to do with the students kind of getting on it, because obviously most of them were sort of in their first and second year, and I then have to teach them when they came back. So, or if they didn't get on. So it's kind of like and to make it more of a professional experience. So they would apply to the production, a kind of CV, which is more of an exercise. Obviously, they didn't have any experience, but it was more just going through the common industry process of kind of cover letter and a CV, and then Justin, the director, and Stephen, who was the editor and the post-production supervisor, they did the interviews for the students, and then they just checked with me as a member of the course team that those students were in good academic standing. And that what we decided that was if you had to be attending, like you couldn't just be applying to be on this kind of thing but not turning up in class, mainly because that shows that if you're in class that there's a kind of level of trust in terms of actually committing to it, and being part of the whole sort of community process of it. And the other thing was you couldn't have work outstanding at the time of the production, so it was done in spring break. But if you had like outstanding work from the first term that needed to be in just either just before or just after spring break, I can't remember, then you couldn't do it because it wasn't assessed, so it couldn't impact your studies. Okay. Which because it can't be to the detriment of your degree, which is kind of why you're there. So it wasn't assessed. It's really hard to do it assessed. Film wise I always find kind of live briefs and live placement work much harder in film than other kind of screen industries like TV or something, or even advertising, because there's no schedule for this stuff. It doesn't happen on a schedule. There's no broadcast date. There's no kind of streaming calendar. There's no kind of sort of deadline for airing in terms of a campaign if it's an advert or something like that. So you're kind of waiting for money, you're waiting for opportunity, you're waiting for all these kind of things to align if you're trying to make a film. So trying to align that with 12 weeks of assessment, I just thought was always, and doing that thing which you said, which is trying to make it available for enough students. We couldn't have done it assessed because it would have meant trying to get 120 students through it, for example, if it was a core module. So, but it wasn't. And again, the aim was try and put first and second years on it so they could come back into the course with that experience and then see what would happen to the course with those students who'd been in that professional environment. That was one of the key things we wanted to sort of learn and sort of track in terms of the students' experience. I think that's all. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Other people don't matter to me anymore.
I feel the same.
To us.
You brought us down here. I don't know where I am.
Say it now, you never meant it before.
There are so many things you don't know about me.
Two people can love each other and not like each other all the time. Two people can also love each other and not be together because it's just a mess. I'm not sure if we're just gonna make a mess.
This is perfect, isn't it?
It's all I've ever wanted.
You mentioned earlier on that phrase mindset, and I think that's, it's obviously a key thing going through university, the mindset of a student to a mindset of a professional, and sort of developing that as you go through. But then, when you've got a specific project like that, it's got to be enacted very quickly, otherwise things can go wrong. And I just wondered, what stories can you tell about problems that maybe came up? Did any students kind of not get that actually this is a professional set, this is not just a lark kind of thing?
Yes. You know this, so we've talked about this. We learned a lot from it, in terms of what what students would bring to it in terms of their mindset and their expectation and how they saw it. We were very lucky that the majority of the students, I think there was about 23 to 25 students who were on set, and then there was extra students in post-production. But I think about 25 students that were on set at various times over the course of the 11 days, and out of all of those students, 2 of them just didn't get it. One of them didn't get it in a way that was just kind of not a particularly negative experience for anyone, in terms of, they couldn't get to grips with the culture and the hierarchies. And I say hierarchies not in terms of a power concept, but in terms of, there are hierarchies on a film set that, in order for the thing to work, often need to be maintained. So second AD, third AD to a second AD to a first AD is a hierarchy. It doesn't mean that the first AD is quote unquote more powerful or should be bullying or dominant or anything, but it means that they have a level of responsibility which everything needs to feed into in order for things to operate, because everything is time and everything is money, and everything needs to, everything, it's just a really, really kind of high pressure situation on a film set. So when you talk, who you talk to, how you talk is really, really important for a very, because if everything gets derailed, even for like 10, 15 minutes, it can really mess up your day. So, and that obviously brings with it a certain pressure in terms of how people talk to each other and how people communicate to each other. And often that's not the best. But for the most part, it's just, we need to get this done. And you can create an environment where around that period of kind of being on set and actively shooting, people feel like welcomed and, trusted, respected. And then it's kind of like, okay, we're not going to be cruel and mean, but we're going to be like, okay, just do this now. We need to do this now. Please do this now. And one student just could not grasp that their role was functional and we just needed them to do certain things. And they kept speaking out of turn, and they kept like speaking to the wrong people, speaking at the wrong times. And it was a lot, but because the teaching was built in, that was fine. Like it was fine to just be like, again, you wouldn't say this on a, if you were out there or not on this kind of project, this would be a problem. And we did that for a lot of students, and a lot of them got it very, very quickly. Like, okay, yeah, cool. And one student just didn't get it. It was another case where it was slightly different. And this student was, kind of actively not engaged in the process when they weren't doing the job that they were doing. They were in the sound department. So they were just taking themselves off to work on their own stuff, which was really weird. So I would come on set as a producer and the screenwriter, and that a scene would be being prepped, and the student would have their own script out and be kind of making notes for their assessment and stuff. And it's always sort of 2 or 3 times I was like, it really annoyed me, because it was like, it was just so disrespectful. And I said, like, what are you doing? And I'm working on my script. And I was like, should you be working on your script when you're working on someone else's film? And you're in the sound department, and would you do that on a why are you doing that? And they turned around and they said, oh, I would never do this on a professional film. And I was just like, what do you think this is? And they're like, oh, this is a student project. And I was like, is it? Like, what about, you're going to tell the actors, that it's a student film? And it wasn't a student film, but it was just, I was absolutely kind of shocked that they were. And I said, well, maybe it doesn't look great to be, working on your own kind of personal project when, we're trying to shoot something else. And it didn't phase that student. That student was like, well, thanks for that, but just going to keep going. And I was like, I couldn't do anything about it, because, and the reason I couldn't do anything about it was because I hadn't put in place the structure of what to do if that happens. I just never imagined that would happen. I just thought that, even if I thought the students would be on their phones, sort of bored or whatever in between stuff. And that didn't really happen, because most students were kind of like, this is great. And because we shot over 11 days, there was very little downtime. And a lot of that downtime was kind of talking to them about what was going on and sort of doing teaching alongside the making of it. But for this student to just be completely disrespectful was really interesting, and made me think, oh, actually, we need to build in the opportunity to fire people, because if that had happened if you were on a professional set, and I know it was a professional set, but what I mean is a professional set outside of the context of the university, that this very, very unique way of doing things that we were doing. If you did that to any degree, you would not be back. There would be absolutely, it's completely disrespectful. It shows that you're not engaged with what you're doing. It shows you don't really care about the project. And, a lot of people don't care necessarily to the depths of their soul about the script that they're working on. But there's an assumed level that everyone's working on the same thing, pulling in the same direction, committed to the same task. And to visibly see someone absolutely not engaged with it was just really upsetting. And I think why I would like to fire that student was for teaching only. I was annoyed, but I was like, the only way that you're going to learn really is to be told, you know what, don't come back. We don't want you back. That would have happened several times across the course of the shoot in terms of things that students actually did. But a lot of the time it was just a conversation. And I would say, like, if you did that, in a different context, then you would be told at the end of the day, you're not coming back, for a variety of reasons. And it wouldn't necessarily be malicious. It would just be like, that's too disruptive. We can't have it. We don't have enough time to deal with this. We need to sort of nip this in the bud. And most of those students were like, okay, I'm really sorry. But this student was just like, no. And that was a shame, but it was also a valuable thing in terms of we have to have stakes in these things, I think. Otherwise the learning that students get is not where it needs to be.
Mm. Yeah, it's always a difficult thing, and especially like student groups is the really hard, isn't it? Internally, because you can't fire people. No. So then that jeopardy kind of is not, with it not being there, that can affect the production for sure. So we have a work-based learning module coming up in the second semester, and there are projects on that. I mean, not to the scale that you've done there, but these are assessed. And the assessment is around, what do you garner out of the professional environment in terms of your learning? And that could be technical skills, but it could also be, a wider sense of life lessons, or, notions of how to behave in certain situations and attitudes, some of the things you've talked about there. So I wondered, coming off of the project then, what feedback you got from some of the students in terms of that learning, and then where some of these students kind of found themselves career-wise on the back of this, maybe?
Yeah. The learning was amazing, really. And it was in so many different ways. So about a year later, I kind of got the students together and interviewed them about what they remembered of their experience on the film, but also how it had impacted their studies. So they went off, and then when they came back, what was interesting was that so much of the production culture changed in the school, because we had a lot of students who came back and were producing or directing, and they'd seen it work in a kind of live setting, and just it changed how they managed their production meetings. They changed how they managed their sets. They changed how they talked to people, and just the culture kind of shifted overnight, really, in a really, really kind of significant way on the course, because those students came back and they taught each other. Like there was a lot of peer learning that happened, where they were just able to, they felt more confident that they'd seen how to do it, and sort of pass that on to their crews on the course, which was really great. A number of the students that worked on it kind of paid a lot of attention to the person they were working with, be that actors, if they were kind of just assisting, and kind of working with the actors. The best one was the edit assistant was so good, working with Stephen, the editor, because he did all of the sort of the DIT and the syncing on set with the students, and one of them she was just great, so he was like, just stayed in touch, and he got her a placement in the summer Post House, and sort of mentored her, and she works as an editor in the industry now, and we brought her back as a graduate to work on another short. So she came back to edit a graduate short, a short that we'd made in-house in a similar way, and we asked her to edit that just a couple of years after she left, and she'd already learned so much from Wilderness and then working in industry, and then she took her edit assistant on that and got them a placement where she was working, and he's working in industry now as well. So that network, that kind of pipeline was amazing, really, in terms of the opportunity it provided students to see the kind of jobs that they wanted to do, to know which areas of film they wanted to work in, and then being able to kind of make connections with professionals, and there weren't that many, or to just, like I said at the start, just know, oh, actually, this is what I want to do. I want to work in production design. So how do I do that? And then those conversations we had in their third year, were all around how can I do this? There was a real kind of focus to it, which wasn't there before, and then that was really valuable.
Great. So I'm going to ask a couple of final questions, and then I'm going to offer it out to the students to see if there are any questions that they might have. But just turning to the screenwriting, because there are screenwriters in the room today. So obviously with writing scripts, at university, sort of all bets are off. You can kind of do what you want. But we sort of, I think screenwriting teaching talks a lot about writing for an audience and that kind of thing. So how do you feel about that sort of conflict between for yourself as a screenwriter, writing a story that you want to write and then thinking, is this going to sell? Is this going to be interesting for a wider audience? How do you sort of balance that in your mind?
I mean, I saw this question before. It's a really tricky one. Because I think if you write with an audience in mind, then I think it's quite dangerous to write with an actual audience in mind. And what I mean by that is kind of imagining who's going to watch it and what they're going to think about it. I think it leads to second guessing, and it leads to you kind of making a lot of concessions, even subconsciously, before you really, before the project's even got off the ground. I think that a lot of screenwriters and sort of writer directors talk about, well, I just write for myself, and I think that that's kind of true in the sense of you as a writer have to have that really kind of deep connection to what you're doing. You have to believe in it. You have to have faith in it. You have to think it's of value. And largely when you're writing, the only barometer you've got of that is yourself. So I think it's really important to feel that way. But that question of like who's going to watch this, I think is an important one. I think that I think there are definitely films I made early on where I was like, I was not critical enough about that, and I took a kind of far too stubborn approach to like, well, this is obviously of value, and, without realizing that the audience for a 1960s silent crime film inspired by Jean-Pierre Melville is not that big. Like just because it looks nice, it doesn't mean it's going to have to, and the one thing I've realized is that as I've made more films is that, the references I'm drawing on, the kind of cinema I'm in conversation with, the kind of films I want to make are not mainstream. They're not mainstream films. So, when I send a film to a festival, I have to hope that someone there knows who Ed Wood is, or knows who Jean-Pierre Melville is, or knows who John Cassavetes is. And the reality is, at indie festivals all over the world, at distributors all over the world, they don't know who these filmmakers are. So my audience is niche, and it's cinephile, and it's people who are engaged with cinema that's quite specific, and there was a period where I did get really upset and angry internally of like, why are more people not watching this? But the reality is that not many people watch that stuff. I love it, and I know that. And what's been interesting is when it's got to festivals where there are people whose cinephilia kind of crosses over with mine, there's been such enthusiasm for my work that it's been really rewarding. It's just never going to be hugely successful because the kind of films I make are not like that. They are for smaller specialist audiences, and I'm okay with that now. When I was younger, it was more difficult, but it never stopped me making the work. I just had to be critical and reflective and be like, okay, well, what kind of filmmaker am I? What kind of stories do I want to tell? And it would be embarrassing to show my work to a huge audience because 90% of them would not get any of the references to it, and they'd just be like, this is terrible. And I'll be like, so whether it's good or not is harder in that space, and I have to be the judge of that. And I can see, looking back at my work, I'm like, I can see that this is not a good version of even what I'm trying to do. It's not a great, I had an idea for a particular type of style or a particular homage, but I can look back and go, even in that context for that small audience, it doesn't work. But learning from it, and kind of trying different things and sort of coming back now and having made a feature and a couple more shorts since, it's like, okay, I'm still working out who I want my audience to be and who they really are.
Yeah, and there's that sort of idea of a criteria for success, I think, is something that everybody kind of reckons with, don't they, throughout their careers? What does success actually mean? So just finally, what's your attitude towards writing and getting critical feedback? And not just writing, maybe on the film itself. How do you take and use feedback on even rejection if you don't get a project or you don't get funding, for example, without getting apathetic, angry, disheartened, depressed, all of those kind of things? How, what's resilience for you, that word that is thrown about like confetti everywhere?
I hate that word, resilience, just because of all the horrible neoliberal connotations. The whole world sucks and you need to kind of be resilient to it. It's your fault if you're not. I find that deeply problematic. I do get angry, and I do get disheartened, and I think that's fine. I think it's important to get angry, and I think it's important to get disheartened. I think it's important to invest a level of care and feeling and emotion in your work that's serious, and I think that when you get feedback, you can be angry about it. I think, but it has to be a process. I think that what I've realized is that when I've been angry at feedback, and it took me a long, long time to realize this, is that I'm not angry at the person who's giving me feedback. I'm not angry at that I'm angry at myself. I'm angry at myself because I've sent work out, and deep down, I knew it didn't work. I knew it wasn't good enough. I knew it wasn't ready. And for whatever reason, I've put it out and been like, okay, here we go. And then someone said, you know what, Neil, that doesn't work, or I'm not sure about this. And I've taken that really personally. And I've been like, you don't know what you're talking about. How dare you? I'm a genius. All that kind of nonsense. But that's defensiveness at masking something which is actually, you know what? It doesn't work, and it's not ready, and it's not great, and it doesn't, that's a long process. But I think that dismissing people as if they don't have anything to say or anything to add is really, really dangerous, and thinking that best. Couple of quick, like Mark Jenkin is very, very open with his process, and I work with him quite a lot, and he always shares his work in advance, scripts and stuff a lot of the times, where, up until recently. But I look at his work and go, I don't know what to say, because he writes in such a specific way. And I know that what is the script is going to become something very different in the film. So he's looking for something he doesn't really know. He's not looking for someone to tell him if it's good or not. He's not looking for someone to say, he's just looking, is there something that he's missed, that's for kind of glaring, and often there isn't. But that openness is really, really important, and finding people that you trust to spot stuff. When I'm teaching, I'm always like, you need to share your work, and then they share it around a classroom, and everyone goes, "It's really great. You're doing really great. I really like this." Like, it's not helpful. Absolutely not helpful to just be really lovely and say this is great. It's not about being mean, but it's about just being honest and saying and trying to make the work better. The only way you can make the work better is having a really good conversation about it. So you have to get to the point where you're comfortable saying to someone else, I don't think this works, or I'm confused, or, why did you do that? And a lot of that fear comes from the fact that you don't want someone to say that to you. So you don't say it to anyone else. And then that just creates this kind of circle of, platitudes, where the work just stays where it is. And there was a script editor friend of mine has this great saying. I don't think it's necessarily his, but I got it from him, which is, if someone tells you there's something wrong with your script, they're probably right. And if someone tells you how to fix it, they're probably wrong. And I love that idea that if you read something and it doesn't work, and you say it doesn't work, it probably doesn't work, and it might not be bad. It just might be that it's not communicating what the writer wants to do. Your idea of how you're going to fix that is entirely on you and your subjectivity and your taste and your experience and how you approach a story. So you might not be able to fix that problem. The writer can fix the problem, but if the writer is open to understanding, okay, this person has said it doesn't work, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to see what they mean, and it could mean anything, and you're the best person to do that. But if you're not open to that possibility, that your first draft, which you're still calling draft 25, but is essentially still your first draft because no one's seen it. If you're not open to the fact that it's not where it needs to be, if you're not open to that, then it's never going to get any better, So look around the people in the room and build a network of people that you trust, and not just screenwriters, but directors, producers, cinematographers. Like, get people to look at it and get as many eyes on it as possible, and then start to develop your own critical response, and never reply straight away to any feedback. If you get notes, give it like 5 days before you respond. Even you just say, thanks very much, I'll look at these later. Even if you read it and you hate it and you punched a hole in the wall, just say, thanks, I'll look at this later. And then 4 or 5 days later, maybe get a response. But you have to go through that emotion, because you see it personally, you see it as your investment, but ultimately where you'll probably get to is the fact that, yeah, they're right. And I know that. And the reason I'm upset is because I know it's not good enough, or I know it's not ready. And there's so much emotional investment in it. You just have to kind of wade through all of that to see it in the clear light of day of like, okay, well, how do I move on from here? All the great writers have a process that involves that in some way, even if it's working with an editor, script editor, or if a novelist working with an editor, or a poet. Like, everyone goes through a process of dialogue about their work. Screenwriting is not solitary in the way that people always think it is.
Yeah, you and I have had these critical conversations over the years many times, which is always interesting. Okay, anybody want to ask a question? Come on up. Thanks, Tom, for being the first. If anybody else has a question, if you want to come to the front, and might save some time.
Hi, Neil. Sometimes some criticism I get is like I put too much of my life into my own work to sort of a slightly detrimental effect. And I'm interested as a writer, not that I will probably stop doing this, but how do you keep your writing personal without kind of ruining your interpersonal relationships with your friends?
The audience is laughing, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, hard question, really. Drama, not diary, I think is a key phrase I kind of use for myself. It's like, no one's interested in the specifics of my life. Like, they don't care that I personally have been dumped or had a bad experience. Like, they're not interested in that. They're not interested in me. They're interested in the story, and they're interested in engaging it, and if you can translate your experience into something which other people can tap into, that's where the real good is, and that's hard to do, because there is a lot of reason why we write is to get it out, to get these feelings out and get them on the page. And I think that it's a case of working through and past the very, very direct experience that we've had, and trying to sort of work out how others who haven't had that very, very specific experience but have had a similar experience can tap into that. You really don't want your friends to see themselves directly on the screen, or your family, like. And I did it once, actually, and I thought at the time I was doing the right thing, and I spoke to a friend about it and said, like, I'd like to take this experience and put it in, and it's in Wilderness, actually, and I wish I hadn't done that. I'm still friends with that person, but I think it shifted the friendship. And I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd have. And again, I didn't have a lot of time, and I should have done something else. But there was something about what happened to this person that I really wanted to kind of explore, but I didn't do enough to make it obvious that I was exploring it. I was just kind of repeating it, and that didn't feel great. And also, yeah, like, just the specific is universal, but what specific is key. So having a kind of sense of detail and a sense of texture that comes from your experience is really important. But the actual diaristic events, you have to work out how to kind of push them away and bring back in what was meaningful emotionally about that, and changing as much as you can in terms of the specifics of the sort of the gender, the age, the race, or the the actual physical context of something is really, really important. But I think at where you are, you can't really think your way out of that at this stage. You just have to write your way out of it, and you just have to work through, and hopefully just be honest and genuine with people, and empathetic as well. Don't exploit people. But often people will be just uncomfortable, but if they can see that you're trying to do something for the right reasons, and it is for you, then that they should forgive you in time.
Lots of people giving Tom.
It's a really good question, though. It's a really good question.
Which I'm sort of worried about a little bit. But anybody else want to ask a question? Yep, come on. James afterwards.
Hi. So, in regards to what you said, how can you do that without like kind of losing the essence?
Say that again.
How can you do that without losing the essence?
I think this is kind of, it's applicable to all screenwriting. Really, is what is it really about? It's never what it's about. So, if you have an incident where you're, for example, mugged, if you then put that mugging on screen and try and recreate it in detail, it's always going to miss the point. It's never going to be able to do that faithfully. But what's important about that is how you felt. How did it make you feel? Scared, vulnerable, ashamed, like all the feelings there. That's what it's about. So the mugging is an emotional act, as well as a kind of practical act. If you're trying to kind of recreate it as if it's like a crime reconstruction, then you're ultimately focusing on all the stuff that's external, all the stuff that's exterior detail, rather than the emotion. That emotion can be translated into another thing, which isn't a mugging, which doesn't happen to you or your kind of screen alter ego, but where the feeling that you felt when it happened to you can happen in this character, and the audience can, because it's been moved away from your very, very specific context, can be experienced by an audience. One of the things about screenwriting, which I think is really important, is that when you're making a film, so much of what you've written on the page can change, and often does change. And most of the time, it's for reasons that are not to do with someone who doesn't really care about your script. Most of the time, it's to do, particularly when you're working independently, with time, budget, cast, just the things that happen on a day-to-day basis where we have to change this thing. We can't shoot this in 2 scenes. We need to do it in 1. We can no longer have this location, so you have to change that. We can't get this person to do it, so who can we get to do it? Like, all that stuff constantly changes what you've written, and as a writer, you need to be okay with that, and you need to be fine to say, yeah, let's work on this, let's work on this. And I think the way that you get fine with it is by having a really, really clear idea of, okay, what is my story about? When does this change into something that I'm not comfortable with? And if it's about feeling, and it's about emotion, and it's about experience for an audience, then you can kind of do anything, like you can go with any kind of change that you need to in terms of a production, as long as inside you go, actually, if you do this change, it suddenly becomes a different story. It suddenly becomes about regret. And I don't want it to be about regret. I want it to be about, the story is not about regret. The story is about this. So the more that you are really kind of connected to what the story is about emotionally, the easier it is to write things which are not directly connected to your personal experience, and also allow you to roll with the punches of indie filmmaking, or even kind of high level filmmaking, where so much is out of your control. But what's in your control is, what is this about? What is this feeling that I've had that I want to translate to an audience? So those kinds of post-it notes or whatever, that those little kind of symbols to you that help you stick to that, those are the things that really, really count.
Cool.
Yep. Thank
James?
you.
Thanks. Good question, Dario. Good question.
So one thing I personally struggle with is imposter syndrome. I don't put myself out there for a lot of projects, generally because of that. Have you found, working with students, that any of them struggle with imposter syndrome, and how do you personally help them overcome that to sort of crack on with the project?
Good question.
Very good question. Very good question. Yeah, not just students, staff, myself included. I think imposter syndrome, we all have it, and a lot of us still do. What changes is how you deal with it. I think that one of the things I'm really interested in terms of my day-to-day work, in terms of working in a university now, but this kind of stretches back, is who gets to do this stuff, and I think that even those really, really confident students who you sit next to, who you think they've got it all figured out, they've got so much experience, they know exactly what they're doing, they're if they're honest with themselves, they have similar feelings to you. And a lot of it is, the fake it till you make it necessity of life. You just have to find somewhere the confidence to make that step into that space. I see my role, and I always have done in terms of being a producer, of bringing people into that space who don't think it's for them, because I don't think it's for me. I look around in terms of my background, and I don't see many people like me who grew up in a place like Luton, no film, no film education, no film culture, no access to that kind of experience growing up. I made it with a friend who, like I said earlier, kind of supported me when I was down, and I did the same. This kind of little team of like, well, if we want to do this, and I don't see why we can't do it. And now it's about making sure that if you're a student who is sitting there just thinking, oh, I'd really like to do this, but I don't think it's for me, it's saying, no, it is for you, because it's for everyone. No one has the exclusive right to be a filmmaker or to work on a film set based on anything. Like, do you want to do it? Yes. Are you prepared to work hard? Yes. Then come on, we'll do it. A lot of it is just trying to pay attention, looking out when I do a talk. Can't see you all now, but I'm assuming that there's people there, and just looking out and just paying attention to people. How are they sitting? Do they look like someone who really wants to do this but just doesn't have the confidence? And it's about going up and saying, you know what, you should do this. You can do this, because everybody around is going to have the same level of experience, and we're going to help you learn. That's the point of doing it. And I did that before I was in university, and it's always been the same. One thing also I've learned, which I think is really important, is that the majority of people you meet in film are well-meaning, decent people. There are some horrible idiots, and they make it harder for everyone else. But most people want to do good work. Most people want to have meaningful experiences. Most people want to help those coming through and give back and support, and it, more often than not, just asking a question of someone will respond with a good answer. It is really hard, but the only difference between you and anyone else around you is that they're gonna somehow find the confidence to make that first step. That's the only difference. You have as much to offer as anyone in your own way, and the quicker you can make that really nerve-wracking step and say, okay, can I do this, the quicker you're going to find out what that is and find your people to do it.
Great. Maybe one final question. Yeah, come on up. Like, just waiting for someone to come around who's in the middle.
Hi, Neil.
Yeah.
yeah, so I live in London, also being a student in London. I was just wanting to ask, being kind of a person from Bedfordshire, from being a lecturer as well, because of where I come from, I feel it's kind of a bubble. It doesn't fully represent what our country kind of the social attitudes and the cultural differences. What would you say were the kind of like key differences, would you say, or like the sort of differences would you think or fully represent what our country kind of shows in filmmaking and also just socially in itself?
Do you mean like, yeah, could you say that again? Sorry, because I'm not sure. I think that's really, I'm not sure. I don't want to misunderstand.
So I just said I personally feel living in London and being a student filmmaker in this city has its limitations and restrictions due to it being such a vast metropolitan bubble and not actually fully representing like the actual societal attitudes in this country. And like my question is, what were the cultural and social differences being a filmmaker and lecturer in kind of Bedfordshire, which is kind of more kind of like rural sort of Britain, even though it was Luton in itself, but still.
Yeah.
Oh, the cultural difference between Luton and London. How long have we got, Dario? I spend my life defending Luton, and I spend my life defending Luton from people who live in London or a place where they take culture for granted. You know, I've the place I've defended Luton the most are where I am now, Manchester. Actually, not Manchester. That's unfair. I've never had a problem in Manchester, but like Birmingham, Sheffield, Glasgow, Newcastle, anywhere I go in a big city, you know, where they're like Luton, and it's like, well, you've never been. You might have been to the airport or you've heard the news stories, but you've never been. You don't know what Luton's really like. And I think you could say that for most places in this country, because screen representations of Britain are criminally narrow, London-centric, or if they are regional, they're rural and they're from 300 years ago. You know, it's like period dramas or whatever. Like, we don't know what it's like to live outside London in this country in any real sense. There's no post-Brexit social cinema in any real sense, apart from Ken Loach, and his movies are important but terrible. So what do we know of what it's like to live in these places? You know, there is no regional cinema, but also I would argue, what do we really know what it's like to live in London? What's it like to be a student in London at the moment with, you know, the cost of living crisis, the oligarchy? Like, what's it like to? We don't know, because we don't see these films. We have a very narrow conception of cinema from people who actually live in Britain, and that hasn't changed in a long time. And we have these kind of small examples, which kind of just all the examples of the kind of social realism, or even, you know, non kind of heritage cinema, is cinema that's punched its way through. You know, filmmakers who've just absolutely stuck to an idea and said, you know, here it is. But what we do is we take that one film, you know, and I was thinking of this in terms of like Newcastle, like we've got Get Carter and Stormy Monday. That's it. 2 films. Or Billy Elliot, 3 films from a city the size of Newcastle in what, you know, 45, 50 years. It's absolutely insane. And, you know, there are some places where there's no films that represent, you know, where's the great film about Leicester? I'm sure there's got to be one. Leicester's an interesting place because everywhere's an interesting place. You know, I think if you're a student who's not from London, then, you know, going back home and making a film about your, you know, like, would be a great idea, an important idea. But also, if you're in London, don't think of London as, I mean, I don't know where you're from in London, but I doubt you would ever say that London is one monolithic thing, despite it's kind of the power it exerts. You know, I think if you grow up in Hammersmith, it's very different to growing up in Walthamstow, or you grow up in Chelsea, it's very different to growing up in Greenwich or Crystal Palace or Elephant and Castle. Like, they're all different places. London is not one place. Where are the stories that are specific to communities and not specific? You're not just kind of generalistic. I could talk for hours about this, as you can probably imagine. But I think being proud of where you come from in a very, very specific way and wanting to have a cinema that represents your experience and the experience of your place is incredibly important. And I hope that there are moves around the country to make it less London centric in terms of the types of projects that get made. And as someone who now works and lives in Cornwall, I'm really, really kind of proud to be part of a movement down here to represent place on screen, which is not obvious and not, ticking the boxes that everyone thinks of a place.
Well, Neil, thanks so much for all this time and doing this for free. Please join me in thanking Neil for giving us this great talk. I'm going to try and show you. Oh, yeah, knew that'd go wrong.
That was great. I got a glimpse. It was great.
Thanks, mate. And
Thanks.
I'll see you soon.
Will do. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.